Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to 22 Panels. My guest tonight is cartoonist and publisher Tom Kaczynski. How's it going, Tom?
Going all right.
I
Uh,
uh, I finally managed to read Cartoon Dialectics today. Um, I've been sitting on them for forever, and it's one of the reasons I needed to have you on because unfortunately, too often if it didn't come out this week, I don't manage to read it until I need to prep for an interview. So thanks for joining me and causing me to read more of your stuff because I've always enjoyed it. I didn't finish my reread of beta testing the Apocalypse, but it's also fantastic. And there I just did some plugs for you.
Appreciate that. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's you specifically and I love that you picked this out. You specifically suggested that we talk about um and of course I should have opened it up to it right off the bat. Um the name of the essay was you probably know off the top of your head. I don't know
I
why
do.
I'm
Do it's
yeah,
comics. It's
yeah.
technology of consciousness.
Yeah, from Cartoon Dialectics number 3. Um I got to tell you I loved this essay. So I'm going to start by having you give us the thumbnail version for anybody listening who hasn't bought the comic book yet, so that they can know that they need to order it from uncivilized.com or is it
Well,
uncivilizedbooks.com?
uncivilizedbooks.com. That's right.
Uncivilizedbooks.com.
Yep. Might be available in some local shops for you too, but not
Well,
not
hopefully we'll have it at Modern Age Comics in Algonquin soon, but we don't have it yet. We have to make that order.
sounds good. All right. So comics is technology of consciousness. So basically, I have this kind of ongoing long thesis about comics as a kind of as an interesting medium for the present. And this kind of follows the work of like maybe most familiar to everybody is Marshall McLuhan. The Medium is the Message guy.
Right.
Gutenberg Galaxy and a few others. But he has this whole thing of like how modernity comes about, essentially as a result of print, sort of supplanting, the previous culture, the sort of the medieval culture of manuscripts, written manuscripts, oral culture, meaning a lot of oratory speaking,
Right.
versus reading and contemplating printed words. But the print not only sort of makes you read, but it also kind of sharpens your visual senses in a sense that you kind of a lot of knowledge comes through your visual faculties, and it also standardizes a lot of things. So vocabulary, punctuation, grammar, all these things become very much standardized when sort of the world shifts from manuscript to print. And it basically created a whole new sort of kind of world and culture based around this, a kind of print culture or literary culture, or whatever you want to call it. Some people call it modernity. But we're in a new transition now, and McLuhan talks about this as well. Sort of since the 19th century, there's been kind of a massive increase in technological prowess in the world, especially the Western world, and from things as kind of innocuous as the telegraph way back when, all the way now to computers and networks and televisions, visual, VR, all kinds of stuff that we've got going on. The cell phone in your pocket. So we're kind of transitioning into a new world. This world was essentially created by people that from the literary world, that print world. But the medium is changing. Most of us are now getting information not directly from books, although obviously many people still read. But many of us read in a much more kind of stochastic way. So we're reading, obviously social media, but also just like random articles online, um, or instead of reading, we're listening to books. A lot of people listen to books. They no longer read, like in the sort of the
I
classic
mean,
sense.
I do a lot of listening to books. I'll
Different
cop to
thing,
that, but it's
different thing.
because I'm reading so many comics.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
yes, it is a different thing. It's a very
yeah.
different thing.
So we're kind of in this new world where, the sort of what, the kind of mind that succeeded in sort of the print world is essentially, no longer um, uh, sort of valuable. I mean, it's not necessarily valuable, but maybe more deprecated in the world today. It's still
Right.
valuable, but it's not the thing that today sort of brings. Uh,
I'm gonna pause you for a second because I want to jump in and read the paragraph where you had me hook, line, and sinker as, oh, he's thinking about comics in a lot the same way I've been thinking about comics and like I'm gonna enjoy tonight even more than I thought. It was the paragraph that you headed Digital Man. The much lamented breakdown of grand narratives is a consequence of the new slash old forms of communication, return of the repressed. Typography helped kill religion, feudalism, tribalism, and superstition. At the same time, it ushered in industrial technology, nationalism, democracy, and science. Electric media and technology, radio, TV, internet, social media, smartphones, Bitcoin, etc., bring back old social forms. We are rapidly retribalizing, de-democratizing, re-religioning, and deindustrializing, but in new forms. The digital man has as much in common with the pre-literate primitive man. Um, I mean,
yep,
that's a lot to unpack in one paragraph, but it's definitely um, I mean, I could certainly quibble with specifics and whatnot, but
sure.
um I think it's something that a lot of us struggle with, where on one side, I mean, you hit so many of the things that I think about. You hit on the loss of grand narratives, or I prefer to think of shared experience. In refragmenting, we don't have the same shared experience, and I'd never really thought of the fact that like shared experience was really only a thing from the printing press until like cable TV.
Yeah, I mean, in
So,
some sense, the shared experience. Yeah, I mean, it begins maybe in the print world, but it really becomes kind of heightened and more massive with newspapers and radio, and then television. As you,
but as soon as you have too many options, you stop sharing
well,
again.
that's the thing. That's the thing. Like
Yeah,
most cities would have a couple of newspapers. You would have a few radio stations, and then you only had like three channels to start with, and at least in the
right,
U.S. Poland, we only had
right,
two.
right.
So and that was pretty much standard until I'd say like maybe early '80s, mid '80s for
Yeah,
many people, and then cable really blew up, and started slowly fragmenting all that, and then obviously internet sort of came in on the heels of that, and created a whole new set of channels, that were not even channels. They were just other ways of sort of being on, consuming media, in essentially in private, and in many ways directly with other people, instead of having this go-between, this like anchor, the TV anchor, the TV person. So there's a lot of like sort of one-to-one stuff going on, which is a kind of tribal kind of way of being, one-to-one, versus this the speaker that sort of tells you what's right, tells you
right.
what's the score, which is much more kind of top down, centralized way of disseminating media. But so it had, the internet is sort of breaking all this stuff apart, and this kind of shared experience that maybe we can date it from, I don't know, maybe roughly from the 20s through the 80s, is sort of falling apart. And that sort of that centralization also brought with it, sort of, what you call shared experiences, I call grand narratives. There's a kind of a general agreed upon way that the world was or is, and
Or at least a starting point.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
I mean,
And
there
obviously,
were
there's
still
always dissent.
experts in
Yeah,
fields and
yeah,
whatnot, but
yeah.
like, I mean, one of the things that I think certainly defines American tribalism is we no longer even seem to share facts. You know, what one person thinks is established science and other people think is fake news, you know.
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, both are. I mean, I think the facts are shared. It's just
Sometimes.
the interpretations are mostly. It's like, is this really a fact, or is this something else? You know what I mean? Everything doesn't. Even facts are no longer sort of like, they don't have a facticity. Like they only have facticity for some people, and not for others.
Um, Before we finish up or finish more on comics as the technology of consciousness, because I want to get back to that, but
Yeah.
something that occurred to me as we were putting dates here. Um, it takes us to the mid 80s or the event horizon.
Mhm. I mean, I don't know if those things are related. Maybe they are. I mean, that's something.
Well, it's something to ponder as we go back to talking about. I mean,
Yeah,
that just
yeah,
popped into my head because that's how my brain works. It's like, oh,
yeah.
wait, we just said 1985. Where have I seen 1985 today?
I mean, that's my
So,
other little project. That's the Event Horizon. That's kind of my position that 1985 through 1987 were this really kind of special period in comics history, where both kind of the mainstream and the weird indie world sort of like clashed together, and created all kinds of hybrids and new formats and new ways of doing comics. That have since, sort of like split into multiple different genres,
right,
publishing strategies, et cetera, et cetera. But there was a kind
right,
of moment in that time where a lot was happening. A lot of artists from the indie world would show up in the sort of the mainstream world, and vice versa.
right.
And sort of created this sort of creative ferment, that has really defined comics, until today, even. So.
Oh, definitely,
Um,
definitely.
and so yeah, so I don't know. I mean, it's possible. I mean, obviously the new media were showing up, and in some ways that was kind of the height of the comics. Uh, you know,
Well, I mean, just off the top of my head, I wonder if with the explosion of um further media there, it spurred cartoonists to look at their own creations differently and start thinking about what was inherent about comics rather than just because
yeah.
you had more to compete with. You had to do you had to use the medium as the message more. Does that make sense?
I mean, it does.
Or at least there was reason to think of it that way. It's like, okay, why should I do this as a comic rather than a film? Now that there are camcorders, why?
I'm sure that's part of it. Part of it is also, is a sort of a technological shift, that essentially made it easier to publish.
Yeah,
You didn't have to sort of be beholden to a large organization that had access to a printing press and could pump these things out. All of a sudden, you had a kind of decentralization of the means of production, if you want to use that term, and sort of, much smaller entities could enter the market. And obviously, you also had this shift in distribution that was happening, since the 70s, the establishment of the direct market, which also just opened the doors for a lot of experimentation. So there's a lot of different sort of factors going on here. But I'm sure the medium played some
right.
factor here, and I think later on maybe even more so. Um, but uh, but yeah, there was, it was just this um, this kind of this ferment that sort of, in a sense, kind of transferred from, it flowered maybe in a way in the 60s and 70s with undergrounds, but
Hmm.
in this very specific kind of subcultural way, and then kind of shifted over into this new world as the distribution methods shifted and kind of opened up a new avenue for these things.
Right. Um, you laid out, is it six specific reasons, or characteristics of the medium
Yeah.
that that make it so adept at being a vehicle of conscious. Um, and I love them. They and I won't. Well, no, I'll read it. It's short.
Well, so before we go there, maybe
Sure,
let's just kind of, return to the thesis here. So then, if
sure.
we're on this new world, this digital world, and sort of print, the standard print is sort of deprecated in some ways. It exists, obviously. Everybody's still literate. Everybody can read, but they're not reading full books. They're reading, either short bits on social media, or maybe they're asking ChatGPT to give them a quick rundown, or they're just listening to a book. It's a very different way of consuming information. And most likely, maybe we're kind of reverting to some kind of mean again, back to sort of, I like using older periods as a potential analogy. So like if we go back to the sort of medieval world, literacy obviously existed, but it was contained to a very small part of the population. Depending on the country, anywhere from 5 to maybe 20% of the population could read, and then everybody else was, either maybe you could just barely read, or maybe you can do the numbers and just do some kind of like, you know, uh, minimal sort of literacy. But most things were read to people. Most things were kind of passed on through oratory, or through pronouncements, or through, gossip.
Right.
And we're in a kind of in a similar situation where, like, well, maybe we're reverting to the mean. Maybe there is going to be, we're going back to sort of like the top, 10-15% are going to be the readers. They're going to keep reading books because they're the scientists, they're the historians, they're the philosophers. That they have to read books. That's their world. That's never going to go away. But everybody else has this kind of stochastic literacy, where they're just, they're literate enough to read things, in short spurts, but not really well enough to sort of absorb information in this kind of, in that sort of literary way, from that mode of being. So comics, in a weird way, kind of, fit into this world um, in a maybe underappreciated way, at least right now. They sort of can be a new kind of literacy, for this moment, because it is, generally speaking, still consumed in print form, and um, it contains the linearity of the novel, of the book, as it's still a story that you have to follow page by page, even though on the page you can still kind of play around with the form and different ways of laying out the information. But it is, and also combining pictures and words. It it sort of, it creates a new standard of literacy for today, where we have to also understand images as much as we have to understand words, and
Hmm.
and comics kind of help you learn how to do that in the way that really nothing else can. uh, you know, and then and now we can go into those six, six qualities that comics have, that sort of
S-
are unique
s-
to comics.
Slowness. It must be
Right,
consumed at human speed.
right. So, a comic, unlike a movie, right, is you just flip the page. You kind of go at your own pace, like whenever you're done with the page, you move on. Some people are faster, some people are slower, but that's their pace. Whereas a film, you are going 24 images a second. You can't stop it. You can pause it, you can do whatever, but that's not the same as sort of um, kind of consuming it in fact, pausing a movie just kind of like breaks the whole experience. So,
Right.
so film, TV, video, any of that stuff, is not slow. It's kind of fast. It's just moving at you, at the speed of whatever frame rate that you're at. Um,
Right.
so that's slowness. Obviously also like social media. That's sort of the doom scroll. Like it's just you're just kind of consuming things, and it's very kind of almost you're just skimming the world. Like it's kind of a skim. And with comics, I think it's a little bit it's like a book, except with images.
Well, I would actually say that it's like a book with images, but it's also like the slowness is also, I mean, what I often say is the consumer has way more control over the pacing.
Right.
So it's like a book that requires mental annotating, because there's always something more to grab from the page. So sometimes you might read it quick and just take the surface story, and then other times you might really dive in and start thinking about, okay, why was this positioned this way? Is this telling me something? Was this a natural flow?
Yeah, and and books and comics are kind of structured in two different ways. I mean, there's obviously like, there's a name for it, the page turner, right? Like it's a
Right,
book that's kind of meant to be read fairly quickly, and it's really all
right.
about the sort of the pacing and the action and sort of trying to get to the next page, get to the next mystery or whatever. And then there's books that are meant to sort of be savored and slowed down and examined. And obviously, comics kind of have both styles as well. So.
But I mean, as you said that, I found myself thinking of one of my favorite comics of the year was Jesse Lonergan's Drome. And one of the things that I think Jesse has managed to unlock is how to make you slow down on a page turner, because he uses so many panels, even though really the panels are just breaking up a single picture. He's not
Mhm.
necessarily using, but because of the panels, you're stopping at each gutter, or at least pausing at each gutter. So it like forces you to look at an action page longer than you might have otherwise because of the way he's laid
Right.
it out, you know. Um, yeah,
Yeah,
no,
but
there's just
but that's I mean that's exactly. But you as a reader, you kind of bring your thing. Like you need to be a
absolutely.
reader that's just like, I just want to consume a lot of stuff that's exciting and fast and whatever, and that's how I read. And then there's people who are just reading at a different pace. But that again, it's human in
And
the
then
sense
there's
that every
me,
human
where
is a
I'm
little bit
I'm
different.
both. It depends on the day of the week and the
Yeah, for sure,
story.
for
And
sure. Sure. But it's, I call it human just because, everybody's got a different pace, but
oh, absolutely.
that's the human pace.
And that leads to the spatial and temporal integrity, human space time.
Right.
Uh,
So, so what I find interesting about comics is that it has to define the point of view. I mean, uh, you know, that's a little bit like, one of the sort of theories is that print has led to the development of the perspective, of like the perspective grid and the sort of the technique of drawing that sort of recreates the way the world appears to us on a flat piece of paper. So sort of mimics three dimensionality. Obviously, comics don't have to be three-dimensional. There's plenty of comics that do kind of cartoony, flat kind of things. But but there is a kind of there is a kind of camera frame that gets created, and it creates a distinction between a moment and another moment, or a place and another place, character and another character, however you're structuring your story. And this boundary, I think, is really important. It's, it sort of defines the sort of the boundaries of meaning. And obviously comics can also not have any boundaries, and that comes with its own, the lack of something,
Right.
also, uh, you know, brings new ideas to the experience. But as a rule, with the boundary, it's sort of, it lets you see what the other person is trying to see as well. The sort of, you're essentially, the panel acts in many ways, like the point of view of the other person. So that's where the shared sort of space time I'm talking about here is the artist creating this lens that you can look
Right.
at. So that's kind of how I see it.
Multisensory. Engages multi-senses. And I love that you put this because this is probably the thing that I have the most arguments with people about because I don't think there are any senses that comics can't engage. People will try to talk to me about music and I'll tell them to go read
Yeah.
Palomino or go read anything by Dave Chisholm. They'll say or smell and I'll say, what, you've never read old Mad magazines?
Yeah, I mean, it is multisensory, though I will not call it like a full spectrum,
Not
sensory
necessarily, but
experience.
it
Um,
definitely
but it
talented
is.
artists can evoke.
Sure, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that gets into like ekphrasis. I don't know if you know that word, but it's a word of translating one kind of medium into another, or
Mhm.
one kind of thing into another. So comics certainly can do that, and that's partly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about multisensory, is that you can evoke sound, you can invoke sort of a kind of physicality in the characters, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously it's tactile, just as a piece of paper is tactile. In terms of, you know, I, I I do think you can evoke a lot of things, but it's a very different way than, say, like music, kind of like runs through you and can, like, literally affect your body. You can feel music shaking, bass lines or whatever. Like, you can feel that in a way that you'll never feel a comic book. But obviously you can certainly imagine certain bits and pieces. Um, but what I like is that the character is sort of, also tends to be drawn. You see the character, so it kind of gives the character, and the world some a kind of physicality that the world kind of lacks in a prose novel. In prose, you do have to imagine all these things, but everybody's going to imagine these things differently. So the physicality of it is very, very different, than when you sort of evoke a very specific world that you create, in comics, which creates a much more of a shared sort of experience between the creator and the reader, and obviously reader and other readers, because they're seeing kind of the same, they're seeing the same thing, versus the book. And all these things are, come in doses. It's, I don't want to, like, over determine these things, but that's just kind of making sort of broad comparisons.
Abstraction, possibility of abstracting or cooling the engaged senses. I think this is something Scott McCloud hits on a lot in terms of
Yeah.
choosing your style
Yeah, for
to
sure. Yeah, and obviously comics do different things. There's some very realistic comics out there and some very abstract ones. So there is a range here. But even with the very realistic comics, you are sort of abstracting from reality on some level, and creating, you know, sort of like, I do think of it as a kind of cooling, in the sense that, um, the abstraction does give you a little bit of distance from the object that you're depicting, and it gives you an ability sort of to think about it in a way that maybe you can't if you're just engaging with the project, with the object directly, so it kind of like it's a little bit of at a remove, which a lot of times people think of abstraction as this kind of like negative thing, it's like it's too abstract, it's whatever. But I do think we need abstraction to sort of to function in the world in many ways.
It,
Still want to be able to go out there and touch grass, so to speak, but without abstraction, a lot of things are impossible.
um, one of the key points of what was it? Harari's Sapiens was what separates humans is the ability to share fiction. I think in a way that's what you're describing is abstraction. It's taking something that is real, um, but maybe more real in the way that we agree that it's real than physically real. Like, does that make sense?
A little bit. You know, I do think that there's two kinds of, and this goes back a little bit to the conversation we had about facts, but there's two kinds of ways of kind of being in the world. And one is, kind of comes with the Greek word nomos. It's like you're inside of a nomos, so you're inside of essentially a society, inside of some kind of social structure, and that social structure has certain facts and certain ways of looking at the world, and religions and rituals and manners and politeness and whatever, all these things are kind of in there, and they're sort of socially shared, and that's the way things are. But these things aren't always the same as nature, which
Right.
is outside of nomos. Outside of nomos is like the sort of semi-known, and many times much of it is unknown world of sort of scientific facts, of like experiences that are outside of the sort of the shared experience of being inside the city, inside the society. um, and there's always a tension between these two, because a lot of times we want to be able to know something about the world, but it can, but sometimes that's forbidden for whatever reason,
Right.
there's some kind of taboo about it, or shared, we don't want to know that kind of thing. And then there's this constant push and pull between those two things. And when Harari talks about the fiction, I think that's really what he's talking about. Is talking about this nomos. It's kind of in I don't think most of us would even think of it as quote fiction. It's just kind of
Yeah,
like,
no, I mean
yeah.
the specific examples that he gets into are the corporation and currency.
Sure,
Corporation isn't really a thing until we agree it's a thing.
sure.
A dollar bill isn't isn't worth anything until we agree that it's worth anything, and that's the shared fiction. Um, and I was
Yeah, I
thinking
mean, yeah,
partially that in terms of like the representation of a human, no matter how abstract, there's a certain shape that we're going to associate with human. I suppose you can tell it's the end of the school week, and I participate in lots of different classes because I also had Magritte pop into my head. This is not a pipe, you know. When we're telling a story with a comic, we're telling a story or explaining things because I mean I love comics don't you get used enough in teaching. They should be used for so many abstract concepts that we try to use some mixture of words and diagrams where if we just like went all in and combined the words with the pictures, it would actually make more sense to people. But that's my own soapbox.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no,
um,
absolutely. I mean, I do think that like the skill of drawing could, really should be some kind of like fundamental thing. And I don't mean like everybody has to draw like, beautiful drawings or whatever, but it's just
right.
a way of kind of apprehending an object or a
My
thing or a
my
person
art
or
teacher wife loves you already.
Um, and I do mention that in the essay that there is, every time you draw something, you kind of have to, especially if you're trying to get the likeness right, you kind of have to think about how it's structured, like, so you have
Right.
to, you know, understand something about it. Maybe it's just purely in terms of shape. Maybe it's, but you can go deeper, obviously, with the human body, you can understand the sort of the skeletal structure and musculature, et cetera, to give you some added understanding. But even beyond that, you can apprehend a person's shape, a person's whatever, and actually, Topfer, the first cartoonist, as he's sometimes known, um, in his book on physiognomy, which is really kind of like a treatise on picture stories, sort of talks about this a little bit, where shapes and expressions and all these things, kind of help you apprehend the the character of the subject, and so the drawing is just such an important little tool that we're sort of, I think it's underappreciated. I mean, it's, for many people, it's just this mysterious skill that some people just are somehow grow up with, and obviously some people have a kind of natural predilection to these things, but it is something that can be learned.
Right. Um, Materiality possesses a unique presence. That was the one that I had to read to understand. So what do you mean by that?
Um, so uh, it's uh, it it's what's the how am I gonna, like, the best way to, the way I explain it in the essay is, it has a certain, um it, like, in computer terms, it has to be zoomed in to a certain amount. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
It has a certain kind of physical presence in the world that cannot be, like, made too big or too small, because it doesn't work anymore. So it has a certain shape and size that's kind of right for it. That's why so many comics are kind of unreadable on screens, because either you cannot apprehend the whole page on a screen, because everything shrinks too much, or you have to zoom in panel by panel, but then you lose the whole structure, and then you're losing, either way, you're kind of losing something from the comic, from the sort of physical presence of the comic. So I call this sort of like minimum viable legibility. Like, you need it needs to exist at a certain size. It has a very specific kind of physicality. But there's obviously other ways that you can think about this as well. But that's maybe one way that can be described. You know what I mean? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely. Absolutely. This is, I mean, I'm more of a digital reader than a lot.
Yeah.
Though I do prefer print. I prefer the tactile experience, but I also like being able to carry a library in my pocket. So, it's that balancing act. Um,
Yeah, but even even the digital reading, like, it's obviously better done on, like, a home computer, or maybe a
right.
nice big tablet,
Bigger
versus
size tablet.
yeah, versus your phone, right? So even the sort of the digital reading is already kind of affected by the materiality of the comic,
Mhm.
because you have to have a minimum size device to actually make the reading viable.
So I've gotten decent at reading on my phone. I find that the key is you have to start with the full page, then go panel to panel and end with the full page and kind of put them together in your head. Still
Sure.
not as good as reading it big. Like my preferred version is the absolute edition where I get it the
Sure.
size that the
Sure.
artist had it. But
I feel like
but
that's
it's
sort of
hard to
like,
take that on a train, Tom.
look, I'm not, that's why we call it minimum viable legibility. Like,
Right.
not easy necessarily to be. It's not supposed to be, the
I
comic
I
book, you could
agree.
fold it, put it in the back pocket, you could do that.
Yeah,
But
yeah. And this last one I had to laugh at because I was reading it on an iPad,
mhm.
but in some ways is like one of the strongest points that you made in terms of it being so unique. I mean, because I guess in calling it the technology of consciousness, I'm kind of thinking of other technologies as belonging to something else. And I think like digital technology is more of a community repository than a consciousness or whatever. And so like the resistance to digitization,
Mhm.
both in production and consumption. And obviously that's not 100% because like I said, I was reading on an iPad. Many comics are made on iPads at this point, that sort of thing. But the separation between the text and the pictures, the way that that can't be directly digitized, that can't be directly inventoried or easily trained into the newest large language model. Um,
Yeah, I mean
Definitely
that's
makes it something else.
yeah. I mean, my so let me just let me explain it for the listener a little bit.
Right.
So, one way that I think about that is, text like a book is essentially the entire book is its own metadata because you can very
Hmm.
easily just essentially all of computers as the Matrix the movie told us is made out of a bunch of text, and then you can go down to zeros and one from there, but basically that's how we have, at least for many decades, interacted with computers is through typing text in, text out. When the book is in there, it can be easily searched, because that's basically what how computers and text have worked for forever. So any book becomes its own metadata, and it's sort of easily digestible. It can be easily regurgitated on any screen at any size. You can kind of like change the font size, change the how many words show up on the screen. It's very easy to sort of adjust that and make it legible, and it really doesn't change the experience too much, from its original. But it obviously, reading on a screen is still like a different kind of experience. Um, and then
They
comics
don't have the
don't.
page term the same way, at the very
Right,
least.
right. Which kind of loses the book's physicality, because like when you read a
Right.
book, as you get closer to the end, you really feel that. Whereas
Right.
when you're reading the book, maybe you have some kind of bar that's telling you you're getting close, but that's
If
fine
you're paying attention.
if you're paying attention. Exactly. Um, and also there's distractions on it's the same device could
Right.
be throwing things at you, so you might be reading a little bit, but you're not as
Then
undistracted.
you get an email, and then
Yeah,
you respond to the email, and you come back and read another paragraph or two, and then you get the new sports score,
yeah,
and you go
really
look at the
really good
highlight.
paragraph. um anyway, so comics, they don't have that. I mean, there's an image, there's a drawing, and then there is and there's some text. Also, because a lot of this is hand drawn, it's not always immediately like translatable to like recognition by sort of at least by a machine, unless it was really being trained on stuff like this.
Right.
Which I'm sure it's inevitable on some level, but it is, the comic cannot be sort of like directly digested and turned into its own metadata, because the image, you can obviously digitize an image, but what the image says is not apparent just from the data of the image. You know what I mean? You have
Right.
like you as a viewer, you interpret that image, in whatever way. You can describe the image. You can say there's a man and a woman and a child and whatever. But even that doesn't really tell you what's going on, because there's probably some kind of social situation going on. So there's really a lot of deep levels that images can give you, that sort of even the chat GPTs aren't quite adept at like understanding what's going on. They can describe things,
Yeah.
but there's always some kind of missing
Uh,
component.
I mean, uh, Nick Souzanis, has been working a lot on accessibility in comics, and he invited me to sit in on a thing he did a couple years ago,
Mhm.
for comics for the deaf,
Hmm.
where they took a scene from his Unflattening, and there was the an adaptation of it, but there are lots of movies for the deaf, or I'm sorry, not for the deaf, for the blind.
Yeah, yeah. I was just
Comics
about
for
to
the
say,
blind.
how
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah,
electronic
yeah. Comics for the
yeah,
blind.
for the blind? Yes.
Yeah, so there are lots of movies for the blind where they have companies that will like describe what's going on and whatnot. So they had one version where they had one of those companies adapt it was like a 2 or 3 page scene.
Yeah.
And then there was that another cartoonist who's also a poet and therefore has a language background worked with the scenes
Mhm.
to try to break it down. And
Okay.
then the third was he did it himself with kind of a almost a director's commentary going on. He wasn't just saying what was going on the page, he was saying why he'd done it. Um, and they had like four blind people who were also scholars and whatnot go
Mhm.
through it. And it was really interesting to me that like across the board, it was the poet that they liked the best,
Mm.
but they also wanted his commentary track. They're like the perfect comic would be like we could watch it this way or
Mhm.
listen to it this way, but then listen to it that way. But it might be good to have that other track that was very bland and whatnot, but could tell us specifically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that much about this
But
whole
that
thing.
but
Yeah,
that was how much it took
yeah.
to even begin to
Right, right.
put the comics experience into just words.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm. That's
I mean,
basically what I'm saying.
that was
Like,
the real point that I was
yeah,
trying to make
yeah,
is that
yeah.
like
No, absolutely. It's difficult. And I mean, I would imagine that this is also different. Like, there's different kinds of blindness. There's people who maybe could see for
right.
a time and then became blind, and there's some people that have always been
Well,
blind.
they actually they had one that was legally blind but could kind of see, one that had
Right.
lost their sight,
Yeah, there's
and
different.
one that had
Yeah,
never had sight
exactly. Yeah,
because they
yeah.
wanted to
So
get the
yeah, yeah.
different feels based on whether or not they could even really conjure what might have been
Right,
there.
right. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question, and and it's obviously as a kind of a visual medium, that's going to be very difficult to translate into something like that. Um, uh, but that sounds like a really like an interesting effort, and I almost imagine that their method could in a weird way help AI digest comics because
Unfortunately, yeah.
I can totally
Don't
see
say
that
that
kind
too
of.
loud, Tom.
Hey, I have to see the doom. It's beta testing the apocalypse.
That's true.
So I have to see the doom here. But anyway, but that's kind of what I mean here in terms of digitization. It's like there's a kind of resistance to it, and even if the computer can kind of analyze the image, a lot of times what you see in the image and what the words are can be also kind of at odds with each other. So like the words can very specifically undermine the images or overmine the images and create a whole new meaning based on what you see, which may be one thing, but then the words really bring out something else. So it could be like a wholesome image, but the image is like, oh no, actually there's evil going on here, or
I mean,
vice
I
versa.
think
And that's a whole nother level of complexity of like of seeing these things, combining these things that I as far as I know, no AI currently as they stand can really kind of understand in any
no.
meaningful way. They can spit out images, they can do kind of meme-like things, but ultimately it's really up to the person to say like, oh, you did something right here, and it's just a
Right.
kind of a shot in the dark rather than like some kind
Right.
of meaningful, understanding.
Um, and I feel like I've got a wrap up question, but I'm having or a wrap up on this particular essay
Yeah.
question, but I'm having trouble quite putting my finger on it.
Well,
I guess
yeah, go ahead.
the importance of having a medium for consciousness, a technology for consciousness, particularly in an age where we're becoming more primal, more tribal,
Right.
less democratic.
Mhm. So, I
I,
mean,
I
so
mean, I know how important I think it is,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think
but
it,
you clearly have thoughts, or you wouldn't have written a wonderful essay on it.
right. So, there is, I do think that there is a kind of a push and pull between people and the various media that they sort of, sort of live with or interact with or use to communicate with. And we're in a world where there's many different media, right? And I don't know, I don't know that comics can ever be like kind of a mass medium in the same way that it was before. I don't know if that's really possible. But I think books also will maybe.
One can dream.
One can dream. One can dream.
I
Uh,
mean, they're still very prominent in Japan. We could catch on.
yeah, I mean, again, I'm not saying that that's impossible. I'm just, I'm
Right.
kind of,
I
I'm
know.
taking maybe the
You're hedging your bets.
I'm hedging my bets a little bit here, but in the same way, that the like the human soul, like this thing that we think of, is actually kind of it's actually a little bit of artifact of literacy, like the
Right.
soul, like it really didn't exist pre-literacy. You know, is there a way to sort of like carry the human soul into this morass that we're in, in some medium? So like, let's say it does become very difficult for most people to read print, and that becomes a very specialized kind of thing for the 10% scientists and whoever needs to read. And that comics can maybe fill that void of like a narrative text, visually focused, widely available, as a kind of like soul formation, but in this new way. You've got visuals, you've got images, you've got this new way of kind of interacting with the world, and the comics become the sort of the slow medium inside of that, in the same way that print was, in a sense, like a slow medium inside of everything else. Because even during Gutenberg era, there were other ways of communicating. You could send, you can send messengers. You could send, you had semaphores. You had all kinds of weird ways
Right.
of doing things. You also had just the world happening. You had wars and et cetera, et cetera. And sort of print and literacy were this kind of little bubble that of like focus and understanding, that sort of carried a lot of the sort of the knowledge and ideas about the world along, as everything else was sort of rolling along in its usual fashion. So maybe comics can be that for today, and I don't know if they need to change a lot. I don't know. I don't have like a very. It's more like a vague kind of intuition,
Right.
at something like that. And I do think that comics bring, there is a kind of I do think that sort of the the power of comics really has only been explored like at a 1% level. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we're
Right.
really good at telling like serialized stories and adventures and fights with superheroes and blah blah blah. All that stuff is done well, and it works well in comics. But all the other things, like kind of like high literature, philosophy, science, all these things don't really.
We're getting better at them.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not saying they aren't. I'm just saying that
Yeah.
comics, it's still, given how much of that has happened in the last, say, maybe 20 years, that's still a blip in terms of all of comics
Oh,
history.
absolutely. And
So
well, and beyond that, I would say that as much as it's happened, and there are so many wonderful examples of whether it's nonfiction or philosophy or metaphysical or whatever, um, the medium still gets looked on as the medium of Spider-Man.
I mean, maybe I think
I,
we're in a bubble where that's the case, but you know, most young readers now read manga. You know what I mean?
right.
They don't know who Spider-Man is. Maybe they see
That's true.
Spider-Man in the
That's
movie.
true.
They
That's
don't
true.
read Spider-Man, you know?
And this is in some ways is almost more hopeful to me. I remember like I told you, my wife teaches art. She teaches middle school art. So she
Yeah.
starts each class off with like some sort of general question. And she was telling me a couple of years ago that like on Wednesday, she came home and she's like, I asked them all who their favorite comic or what their favorite comic was, and they all told me they didn't read comics. But then she came home Thursday laughing. She's like, I asked everybody what their favorite book was, and 80% of them listed a Raina Telgemeier book. And when I told them that they were comics, they went, What? Those are comics? I just thought they were books.
That's where it needs to go. It's like people need to read these and not think it's comics, you know?
Right.
That's the way to go.
And I was at a Raina Telgemeier event on Monday, and like a packed theater of 1,000.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Everybody waiting outside in 20-degree weather
The
to get in,
superstar,
and
for sure,
you
for sure.
know,
Yeah, I mean
um,
that's honestly that's actually kind of a, you know, that's a good sign because that just means this sort of the stigma is just washed off on some ways, you know.
and some really intelligent questions from really young kids about her work. I mean, you had some of the basic, is this such and such? But I mean, among other things, she headed it off at the pass with, if it's got an emoji on the cover, yes, it's true. Next question.
It's funny.
Um, but yeah. Uh Normally this would be about the place where I would ask you for your comics biography, and I will in a second, but you're one of the more interesting characters I know in the comics industry. You've got, I think, a background that I want to know more about. You're a philosopher, cartoonist turned publisher, and like philosopher cartoonists are rare, cartoonists turned publishers are rare, and to top it all off, you have moved around a little bit in your life, lived different places and different cultures. So talk to me a little bit about Tom Kaczynski and how you came to be who you are, and then we'll do it through comic books.
Convoluted, long story. But you know, I was born in Poland, behind the Iron Curtain, so it was still the communist era in the 70s. That's when I was born. I got into comics there. Like there was a sizable out of all the sort of Eastern European behind the Iron Curtain countries, communist countries, Poland and maybe Yugoslavia had sort of like sizable comics industries. And so I read comics since I was a very young kid. You know, there was this kind of like kids magazine called like Youth World, where that had comics in it. You know, and I read that religiously. You could find you know, kind of collections of various strips and things. You know, one of my favorite things was going to like you know, what's called Yarmark, which is just kind of like it's just like a flea market, and there was always somebody selling like some old comics at those, and I would buy those up. There was also like an English language library that was not too far from where I was, and there was some English language comics there, including Peanuts that I saw pretty early on. So you know, so I got into comics pretty early, and there was a guy, a neighbor that I was friends with, and he had an older brother who was really into comics, and he was starting to draw his own comics. So so I just, you know, sort of like by osmosis, like was starting to see his you know, sort of drawings, his projects that he was working on. He never really became a cartoonist or anything, but like, there was a time where he was like really into it, and learned, it sort of taught me a lot about how to put together, some basics about how to think about, the fact that somebody actually is drawing these things.
Right.
And
You mean they didn't just magically appear on the page?
and I mean, sometimes the lines are so perfect. It's like, how is this even made by a human? But
Right.
so, and then at some point, my family, decided to leave. Poland was, especially in their like 80s, was under a lot of turmoil. There was the solidarity movement,
Hmm.
which was kind of an independent union that was trying to break from communist politics. And sort of, there's many years of like martial law, turmoil, rioting, and food shortages, power shortages, et cetera, et cetera. And my family sort of decided that it was, it's not really a viable place to kind of like raise a family, and 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 um and we decided to move, and we ended up in West Germany. And this was a little bit of an escape, in the sense that, technically, it was illegal for us to leave. But in Germany, you could essentially ask for asylum. And this was kind of a time where, like, essentially anybody that came over from Eastern Europe was tended to be granted asylum in the West, just because this was kind of a struggle between those two power
Cold
blocks.
War.
They,
Right.
they they sort of wanted to sort of show up the other, that they were helping the people, kind of
But
adjust to
back when the United States didn't like Russia.
I mean, there's many periods of ups and downs in Russia. And the so we ended up in West Germany, but there was never a destination. There was sort of a waypoint, and we always wanted. My dad really, my parents wanted to go to the United States, although we applied to many other countries, English-speaking countries, because my dad was an engineer. He spoke English. He felt that was sort of the way to go. And we, after a year and a half of kind of, you know, going through this process, we got shipped off to the U.S. We got accepted, and ended up in Minneapolis. And in the process in Germany, I also, Germany has a comics culture. There were, I learned about American comics there. I read a lot of European comics there. And then by the time I got to the US, I going into a comic book store was just like, it's like I've never seen a place that had that many comics. So, so it was.
So you were in Minneapolis, so I have to ask, did you know and I think it's still there, but the College of Comic Book Knowledge?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was one of the kind of primary comic book stores. It was not the one I went to the most because it was a little bit out of my way where I lived. I usually went to Dreamhaven Books and Comics,
Okay.
that
I've
one.
heard of that one. I only know that Comic College because one of the co-owners was living in Wheaton, Illinois, where I grew up,
Okay,
or one of the co-founders. I don't remember if he was still an owner. So he went to the shop that I worked at.
right.
So he told me that if I was ever in Minneapolis, I had to go and tell Ralph hi for him, and
Yeah.
Ralph would find me anything I wanted. And sure enough, I was up there on a business trip once and went in and introduced myself, and like my entire list of I am desperately looking for these books was in my hands in minutes.
Oh, they were a great store. They were a great store. It was the College of Comic Knowledge and the Nostalgia Zone. They were kind of like sister
Right.
things in the same space. And they had an insane amount of back issues. But like I said,
Right.
that wasn't my regular shop. I went there, relatively frequently. But it was, Dreamhaven was really my not first store, but where I ended up going a lot in college years because it was on camp. It was close to the campus.
Right.
I also ended up working there, for a few years, and then worked for another store called Big Brain Comics,
Okay.
which I was the first employee of that store. Um, so, but yeah,
I
but
know lots of people who have been first employees of comic shops.
like.
Those of us who love it seem to like. just managed to pull it off. The comic shop I go to now, um, the first employee is actually my boss at the school I work at. The
Right,
second employee is the current owner.
right.
Mm. And it
So,
was both because they were the comics kids that worked walking distance away and they were just there all the time.
yeah, I mean, I was in college and it was easy.
Right.
And I was already like selling my own mini comics there, so like I knew the staff pretty well.
Right.
And at some point they just were like, dude, we need another person. You want a job? It's like
Right.
I didn't even have to do any applying. They just asked.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so but because of my sort of European experience, I never really had like this like, oh, comics are this, like comics
Right.
are superhero comics are this kind of comic or that kind of comic. I was always very like open to different genres and different things. So sort of the black and white explosion in America, all the different sort of things going on in comics at that time were really I loved reading my X-Men and Spider-Man and all that, but I also very much was interested in what's going on in the sort of the indies, the indie comics, the various American Flags, Cerebus, you know, Mutant Ninja Turtles, or whatever,
Right.
like Mr. X, all that stuff. So, um, and then I just started making my own comics. I worked for the school newspaper at the University of Minnesota, the Minnesota Daily, and they gave me a comic strip that I did for a few years there. And I was publishing my own mini comics,
So
and
when are
then
you going to
sort of,
collect that?
huh?
Your comic strip for the Minnesota. I mean,
I mean, it's
Jeff
not.
Smith just collected his. It's
It
a
was
nice
not very,
hardcover.
it wasn't very good. I mean, maybe someday, I don't know. I have to dig up all my pages from that. They're not all scanned, it's like it'd be quite an endeavor. But I did that. Also the
I mean,
Minnesota.
they might be scanned at the school.
Well, when I started, we were still shooting film.
Okay.
So they were not being scanned by the computer. We were like,
No, I understand, but lots of schools because they keep
oh,
archives
you
of
mean
their own
they'll scan
papers.
the archive.
They may have scanned their archive already.
Yeah. I mean, I have the originals. That's why I can, I should just rescan the
Right.
originals. That's probably the best way to go. But yeah, maybe, maybe I'll dust them off one of these days. But I started making mini comics. I got into the whole like, I realized that there was this whole world of DIY stuff. John Porcelino's catalog kind of opened my eyes to a lot of different things. And there were a few creators in Minneapolis that were doing work. Like Anders Nielsen was here. I didn't know him personally, but I knew his comics already. I started buying his mini comics. Zach Sally was here, and a few other creators. So I just sort of kind of like got into that whole thing. At the same time, I was, Minnesota Daily was only the second college paper to go online. There was like one other paper that went online first, but it was the second ever to go online. And they needed someone to do essentially like HTML coding for this paper. So I learned HTML very early on and got into sort of the internet world in the early 90s, through the newspaper. And my strip was serialized online pretty early on, and I got an award from I don't know if you how much you know about the early web, but there used to be a newsstand magazine called the Web magazine.
I vaguely know that.
And the Web magazine pointed out my little comic strip as one of the coolest strips that you haven't heard of. And then sort of I kind of got sucked into the .com boom, just because HTML was kind of a magic word back then. You can kind of if you knew what you were doing, you could design, in Photoshop, Illustrator, and you knew HTML, you could kind of write your own ticket. And I ended up going to New York and working in advertising a lot. and that was sort of why I moved to New York. But I was also kind of got into the New York comic scene, and started. I went to the first MoCA, um, and sort of have been since then. Had a group of cartoonists that I hung out with: Gabrielle Bell, Jonathan Bennett, John Lewis, and a few others. We were kind of a little group of cartoonists that met at each other's houses every week, kind of like see what we were working on, and just chatting and making comics.
It seems like almost everybody was part of one of those
Yeah, you
little
kind of need that.
enclaves
Yeah, you need
of
that. It's important to have peers that, like, A, you respect, and B, you can kind of compare yourself against, and sort of, they spur you on to kind of get better and better.
right.
Um,
First readers, friendly competition,
exactly.
cheap editors.
Yeah, it's really difficult to do something like that without some kind of peer group.
Right.
Um, and then so at some point, me and my girlfriend left New York and went back to Minneapolis. And I didn't want to work in advertising anymore, and I still wanted to stay in touch with all my cartooning friends. The Minneapolis scene, vibrant as it is nothing like the size of the New York scene. So I kind of wanted to stay in touch with people, and sort of started Uncivilized Books as a mini comics press. Worked with Gabrielle and a few other cartoonists kind of early on, and then it sort of morphed into a real press. Gabrielle like asked me to do her graphic novel, The Voyeurs, and sort of walked away for a few months saying, I need to see if I can become a publisher, because if I don't want to have like stacks of these books in my house. I want to have a distributor. I want to have a place to a way to sell these things. And then I sort of hooked up with the local distributor consortium, which was at that time had signed Nobrow as their first comics publisher, and they really wanted to kind of expand. This was kind of that sort of the early days of bookstores embracing comics.
Okay.
um, and I just happened to be in the same town, and they were like, "Yeah, we need someone around that can help us discern what these things are." And so they signed me on, even though I basically had, I had no books and under my belt at that point. And yeah, it's been kind of like that's where I've been ever since then, just kind of, you know, plugging away at Uncivilized Books.
So so what did you study in college? Because you also seem to be ridiculously well read, and I appreciate that just because like even among studious comics people, you don't get people that drop some of the philosophy stuff that you do.
I mean, I studied architecture and art. I had a double major in architecture and
Yeah.
art. And within architecture, you could do a minor. You could do some kind of like kind of minor emphasis. So I did that in CSCL, or comparative studies and critical studies and comparative literature. Uh,
Okay.
so I read a lot of philosophy, a lot of a lot of
Ah, and you're a cat
studying a lot
guy. I
of stuff.
love it.
What's that?
I just saw the cat walk by.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
always happy to see cats in the background.
I've got a couple of cats. Yeah.
But mine got shut out because he has a tendency to want to eat my microphone while I'm talking.
Yeah, they're usually pretty good, but they sometimes get needy, and but
I have three that are very good and one that's a brat.
yeah, we've got two of them, and they're usually this is around the time when they leave me alone, so they're just kind of
Right,
one.
right.
Um, but philosophy is something that I've read since I was young. So
Okay.
it's something that just it's just a kind of an ongoing interest for me, and literature in general too. Like I read a lot of novels, and my reading has slowed down in my older age here, but and also in this digital age.
I mean, that's when I
But
started doing audiobooks because it's like, okay, I can get the literature in to and from work.
yeah. I decided like I tried a couple of books, and I couldn't do it.
Yeah,
And so I decided, like, okay, I'm gonna read less books. I'm just really gonna stick to quality. I'm gonna cut out all the fluff. I'm just gonna like,
right.
here's my
But sometimes the fluff
list.
is fun.
Well, exactly, but like I get my fun elsewhere now.
That's fair.
I get my fun on the internet, you know?
But is that fun or is that just addiction?
I mean, either way, like you can certainly there was a time when people were concerned when people read too many books.
There was. I mean, actually, I think that a lot of the world is still concerned if you read too many books. We complain about lack of literacy, but if you always have your nose in a book, there's something wrong with you.
Exactly, exactly.
Um, it- you did kind of a hybrid U biography and comics biography, so this will be easier even.
Yeah.
But now I want your comics biography, and by that I mean not your bibliography, but tell me like the books that you were reading as specifically as you can remember that formed you, that changed how you looked at comics, that made you want to be a cartoonist. Start early and yeah,
Sure.
talk about the books that are meaningful.
I mean, most of the stuff you won't know because it's from
That's
Poland.
okay. That's okay. That just might
Uh,
mean that you have to send me lists to go find it.
yeah, we'll have to do like a visual version of it. I can show you them. But
Right.
um, the stuff in Poland, I mean, really, that's where I first fell in love with comics, and that's the stuff that I really, resonated with. And there's some kids comics. There's like some very specifically kids comics. There's this kind of like asterisk obelisk style comic that's called Kaikoi Kokosh. And it's basically, like asterisk obelisk is like the Gauls versus the Romans, right? So Kaikoi Kokosh is the Slovenians or the Slavs versus the Germanics, and
Okay.
there is a kind of there's a competition. They're kind of and they're always fighting, and it's a little fantasy. There's a little bit of fantasy world, but the characters are similar in the sense that there's like a kind of a skinny, clever character, and then there's a brawny, kind of big guy. They're kind of the best friends, and then there's obviously like kind of a leader of the German tribes who is kind of a his name is Hegemon, and when there's just this constant conflict, kind of this back and forth. So those are some of the earliest comics that I was reading. And there's also like this one is really difficult to translate, but uh, there's this really great series of comics that really play with language and images, and they're just incredibly playful. It's kind of like a little bit like maybe the closest thing that I can think of in America, and this is not even comics. It's like Dr. Seuss, kind of being really playful with language.
Okay.
Sort of maybe kind of Dr. Seussian comic book. That really was fun. It was just like all kinds of puns and goofy things happening, and it was really fun for a kid to read and just kind of like think about.
What was that one? Was that the
I mean, there's like Pustyni w Paszczy, which is a pun on a well-known Polish like historical novel. I mean, again, this is gonna make no sense to most of you but you've got even that title is like a pun on that title, and there's no easy way to translate that pun. So,
Okay. Fair enough.
uh, um, and then the other comics were maybe a little bit more kind of sort of Euro comic speed. One of them being Thorgol. I don't know if you ever read Thorgol by
I've read the
Kaczynski and
first volume. I need to read
yeah,
more.
yeah. There's like 20 or 30 volumes of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
And the first, I think, I don't know how many, but Roshinsky, the Polish artist, is the principal artist on the first bunch of volumes. Eventually, they get a new creative team in there when Roshinsky kind of ages out of it. But they're really great. It's about a Viking that falls from the sky in a space capsule and gets raised by it's a spaceman gets raised by Vikings. So he's like a little bit advanced, and the Vikings are these barbarians. So he's this kind of like fish out of water among the Vikings. That's a great comic, great cartooning, great storytelling, just a fun comic. And then another one is Funky Koval, which is a like homegrown Polish thing, and it's a sci-fi comic that used to run. There was this Polish magazine called Fantastica, which is a little bit like if you combined heavy metal with one of the sort of like sci-fi magazines that ran actual stories.
Okay.
So you would kind of have Fantastica. They always had some comics in the back, and then most of it was devoted to serialization of various novels and things,
Okay.
or short stories or whatever.
Short stories.
Yeah, that comic ran in the back of that, and it was always really difficult to find specific issues. So I read it out of sequence, but it was just like beautifully drawn, incredible, uh, you know, incredible art. Just a wild story about invasion of Earth by these weird little creatures. And maybe the closest artist in the U.S. Would be someone like Paul Gulacy. Like kind of
Okay.
that kind of quality of the art.
Right.
And that same artist also did kind of an adaptation of Erich von Däniken comics or books for the German market, but it was also really popular in Poland. And there's basically the whole story of like, Atlantis, gods from space, all this kind of stuff. All these comics were just like, kind of mind blowing to me at that time, and just kind of like cemented this long love for comics, for me. Um, and that's when I started making my own comics. My first comics are just kind of these sci-fi, kind of adventure, space battle type things. Uh, that's basically, those are the really formative experiences.
I mean, as a publisher now, do you ever think of looking at getting US rights for any of these books?
There's some Polish stuff I'm working on. There's a great book that I would like to do. That's actually adapting Olga Tokarczuk, who's a Nobel laureate, drawn by Daniel Chmielewski. It's a really cool book, and I'd like to put that out. And but there's all kinds of legal wranglings
Oh,
around
of course.
that
Yeah.
book, so it's sort of in limbo right now. But I've been trying to get that book here for quite a while.
I
And then
mean, it
the
just
Funky Koval book, I really want to do the Funky Koval book, and it's one of those like we had the rights very briefly for a very short period of time, and that was the time when Uncivilized Books and 11 other people, I don't know if you remember the sort of the Defend 11 thing that happened.
oh, I missed this.
Yeah, I mean, this was, I don't even know if I should be talking about this because there was a legal sort of case. But it was, we said some things online about a creator that was, you know, accused of various improprieties, and this creator sued a whole bunch of other people, including Uncivilized Books and a bunch of other creators. So like that's the moment we got the rights, and we basically just couldn't do the book because it was all the legal stuff
Right.
in the middle of it,
Right.
like just I didn't even know if I was going to exist, as a
Right.
TF, so we just had to like give up on it. And so I at some point I'd like to maybe try again, but I had this, yeah, it was a weird, it was a
No, no, it's always
weird.
I mean, we're going through for different reasons, all of the publishers that are number of publishers that are in like dire straits because of stock being held by Diamond that they're not getting paid for and can't
Yeah,
get back and
yeah, we,
whatnot.
I mean, they owe us, they Diamond still owes us a lot of money. But they don't, we never had stock there. We were never one of the companies that had stock there. So at least that
Right.
part of it we're out of, but it still sucks not to get paid.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, comics is not a high margin industry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know,
But I know that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
But anyway,
yeah.
that's the kind of like the early story of my comics career here.
Well, and like it makes I'm going to be reading you know, as I finish up some of the stuff that I didn't finish reading or rereading for today, that sort of thing. It's going to give me a different lens looking at this as okay, uh, we've got the sci-fi background from very early on,
Mhm.
mixed with a really thoughtful, interested in philosophy guy who's lived on both sides of the Iron Curtain. You know, that suddenly makes beta testing the apocalypse make so much more sense just from the title sense. You know, because you've
Maybe you
seen
can
the
explain it to me
extremes of
next
both.
time.
Well, I mean, you've lived the extremes of both a communist egalitarian society and a capitalist egalitarian society.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Supposedly they're both egalitarian, and yet it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but you also got to see things through the lens of. I mean, I'm just thinking between just early interest in sci-fi, any. I'm always fascinated by story. I mean, and now I'm going to have to like really go read Thorgal. I'd forgotten the aspect where it was the spaceman dropped with the Vikings. So that's been how long since I read a
Sure,
volume
sure,
of
sure.
Thorgal. Um, because I'm always fascinated with that particular type of um alternate history.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
there's a shared novel universe called The Ring of Fire, where Eric Flint took a town from West Virginia in like 2000
Mm,
and dropped it into Thuringia
mm.
in during the 30 Years' War in 1636. But it's very specific in creating the universe. He picked a town that was going to be the fictional Grantville, and
Right,
he
right.
like cataloged their library. He found out what resources their schools had. So even as he threw the universe open to other professional writers and other um amateur writers, it was these are your resources. You
Mhm.
can't magically have things. If you can come up with a reason why they should be able to make an airplane,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
then
Get a
they can have an airplane, but it's got to be.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it reminds me a little bit. I don't know if you read this, The Drifting Classroom by Kazuo Mezu,
I don't think I have, but that sounds
manga series.
fascinating. Yeah.
It's you know, it's a school. It's a whole school. It's like a kids from like kindergarten to maybe like
Okay.
middle
This looks
grade,
cool.
but teachers. This school somehow just gets projected like 10,000 years into the future, and they have to survive in this like post-apocalyptic world with
Okay.
humanity changed into kind of a crazy crazy thing. But it's a great 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 book. I wrote a review of it for the Rain Taxi review. It's like one of my favorite mangas. It's really
No, I'm gonna have to read this. This looks fascinating. Um, and God, dude, I mean, one of the things I always say about manga is think of three things that you don't think have anything in common, and there's a manga about that.
oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, that's this is kind of the dream here, right? It's like why can't we, like they can have they can have sports manga. Why can't we have sports manga?
Right. I'm actually amazed, and every time anybody goes to Japan, I ask them to look for this because I'm certain that it exists and it just hasn't been translated. There was a New York Times story like 4 years ago about the retired Yakuza softball team. Like an actual retired Yakuza softball team. Like the softball team between them has spent more than 250 years in prison. Almost none of them have all of their fingers. Um, and they started wearing pink and black because initially they wore gold and black, and the other teams were afraid of them. And they're actually the team that takes it least seriously among all the teams in their league. They like get their asses kicked on a regular basis because they're out there drinking beer and smoking cigarettes and just having a good time. And apparently, the PTA teams take softball every bit as seriously as like the high school teams do. And high school baseball in Japan is ridiculous, right? So I'm like, this is actual real life, and it feels almost too crazy for a manga. There's got to be a manga about this.
Yeah,
I want to see it.
yeah, for sure, for sure. But yeah, well, I think we've, sort of like we've only scratched the surface with comics. It's kind of
Well, and we've definitely only scrapped in the US. We've only, I mean, this is why I was asking about translating or, getting the rights to some of the stuff you loved as a kid. We've only scratched the surface of really translating and bringing comics from around the world to the United States. There are so many phenomenal comics in the world. Um, and you actually do a fair amount of that. How do you?
I mean, I've done a few. I mean, it's a difficult. It's definitely difficult. If you don't have a lot of resources, it's difficult, to fund that. Because not only do you have to like have a resource to like translate the thing, you have to reletter it. You have to there's all kinds of extra production that comes with it. And it
Right,
just brings all this extra cost to the project. And that is probably going to be marginal as it is. So it's difficult to do this for kind of the smaller titles, and I've done it a few
right,
times, and worked out okay, but it was never like a very highly profitable thing, unless you can maybe snag a grant or something
right,
from the other country that where they support this kind of thing, because there are a lot
right.
of countries do have grants to sort of disseminate their various cultural artifacts, including comics.
But
Um,
but
yes,
how do you find and decide upon the material was actually where I was interested in first.
I mean, it's, once you're in comics, you kind of just know, especially when you're on the publishing side, you just like agents find you.
Okay.
They're looking for places
So
for
they're
stuff.
looking for you, and then you're going, this looks
Yeah,
interesting.
and
Tell
like at
me
first you
more,
get kind
or
of like not the greatest
not for me.
projects, but then every now and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, this looks amazing. I would do that, like, and then
So
the
what you're
other
saying is if I want to be able to read a lot of comics from around the world, I just need to start publishing.
yeah, be the change you want to see in the world.
I feel like that was on a bumper sticker somewhere.
If you want to see more comics from around the world, you can, there is a path. You just have to,
Well, I didn't even mean in translation. I just meant if I wanted people to give me free copies of comics from around the world, I need to be a publisher so that they think I might publish them.
sure, but you will also get these things in, not in English language. You might get a sample. You might get a sample.
Right.
So yeah, I have the advantage of being able to read Polish and German. So, a lot of times the titles, like a French title, would also there might be also a Polish edition or a German edition. So I could read
Right.
that, even if I can't read French, so that sort of helps me navigate some of this stuff. But there's a lot of titles where I'm like, oh, this looks really cool, but I don't really have a way to like read it, evaluate it. Maybe I can, if I have a friend who can read it for me, they can kind of do it. But yeah, it gets very
So,
difficult.
so you wouldn't use like the Google Translate for evaluation purposes and then translate it
You
for
could,
real when you
could,
decided that it was worth it?
you could do it. You could do it. It just, it just feels like
I mean, don't get me wrong, it's clunky, but
it's clunky,
uh,
but it's
I've
also like,
become the double electronic guy sometimes, where I have the Google Translate with the camera function on my phone and the French comic on my iPad.
listen, I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that. But I do have a limited amount of time in my life,
What?
and like Fantagraphics, like their greatest moment of translation was when Kim Thompson was still alive and he could
Right,
read and write in multiple languages. So he
right,
was kind of their Google translator. He could kind of,
right.
he also had a great sensibility, and could kind of add that resource to the company. I don't,
Right.
besides the sort of the everyday things that I have to do, like to sort of like have this translation program on top of it. It's
So now we need to figure out how to stop time for Tom to read more comics to figure out what he's going to publish.
there you go, there you
I mean,
go.
Chip Zdarsky and Matt Fraction had an interesting theory on it.
Yeah. Oh, you mean stopping time? um, sure,
But
sure.
that's another book.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, that's kind of where we're at. So
So,
I don't know. I mean,
s-
we're kind of at almost 2 hours here.
yeah, yeah, I was about to say. So Tom, what is next for you? What's next for Uncivilized?
Well, we're serializing.
Anything you want to plug big?
Yeah, yeah, we're serializing The Jungle by Tom Neely and Keenan Marshall Keller, which is a series about um, this biker gang of apes, that and the biker games gang name is the Humans. So it's kind of like think of Planet of the Apes, but by biker gangs, and they call themselves the Humans. A lot of ironies here, but also just an incredibly well drawn and written series by those two creators that I really deeply love, and we're doing it magazine style, so it's a really the artwork like really screams off the page. Like it looks really great that way.
I have copies of it sitting behind me.
Yeah, and then also about to come out is Fox Bunny Funny by Andy Hartzell.
I have read it and purchased it because you may have had it on the road with you.
I did. Yeah, we had some advanced copies. It's a silent comic about a world where foxes and bunnies live, and but they don't really interact. The foxes are the hunters, and the bunnies are the prey, and they kind of exist in their own worlds. However, there appears to be this kind of push and pull between those two worlds, where like there is a kind of a mutual fascination that goes beyond just the sort of the simple, dynamic of hunter and prey, and the you know hybrids appear. Things, there's a fascination of the fox with the bunny with the fox, and these two worlds kind of collide together, and it's all wordless, without words. And Andy makes kind of a really an amazing job creating this thing, not only just sort of like letting you read it with just purely with images, but also sort of creating a lot of room for interpretation, so you can really bring a lot to it, and it gets read in many many different ways, which I think is a cool thing. I mean, that's one thing that images have that maybe like a straight up text, it's difficult to achieve with. And then Andy's other book is also called Monday, which is a book about the Garden of Eden after creation is completed. It's the eighth day.
Right.
God's created everything, and this is the sort of the conceit here is that this is apocryphal story that was taken out of the Bible, but God had some interesting plans on day eight that we
And it
just
was brilliant and funny, and I loved it.
yeah.
There's one book from the current solicit that I wanted to ask you about. The Exile looks
Oh yeah, so
fascinating to me.
yeah. So this one is actually not published by us. This is Living the Line. So
Oh,
because Living the Line has gone through this massive problem with Diamond, their inventory is completely, a huge chunk of it is under lock and key at Diamond, and they've lost their only distributor. So we've been helping them sub-distribute the books through.
okay,
So actually, you're seeing it, but it's an older book. It's from a couple years ago.
gotcha.
Eric Creek. It's a cool book. Don't get me wrong, but it's not one we published.
Not you. You're just helping out, which is
Yeah.
equally cool.
It's great. It's about a Viking that sort of returns home from, maybe years of raiding and fighting, and sort of tries to readjust back into sort of more, everyday society.
Okay.
Really beautifully
Uh,
drawn.
it looks beautiful, which is why it caught my eye, and it caught my eye even more because it had the little UB code. I'm like, oh, it's an uncivilized book, but Apparently not. Uh, but my final question is always my final question. Tell me something you love, preferably a comic, but we don't really have rules. Preferably storytelling, but again with the rules. But something that you love that not enough people around you have experienced, and you want them to, so that you have more people to talk about it with.
Hmm. Uh, I mean, that's a tough one. There's so many comics that I love, and nobody reads them. Um,
That's my favorite kind to hear about, and I will be the guy that reads them. At least if I can put my
so,
hands on them.
yeah. So this is actually dives into a little bit. So I'll talk about this other project. It's this other podcast that I'm starting with Zach Soto. I don't know if you've ever met Zach Soto.
I don't know if I have or not.
He's from Portland. Worked in a lot of different places as also a cartoonist. Has worked on the publishing side as well. Um, uh, and Study Group was a magazine that he worked on with a couple other people. I don't know if you ever read that magazine, Study Group
I
magazine.
haven't. No.
It was one of the kind of like cool indie magazines about comics. So people should definitely read that magazine. But
Study
that's not
group.
where I was going to. I was going to. We have this new podcast that's going to launch soon. So I might as well kind of like pre-launch it.
Please.
And It's called Bin Crawler Theory. And So we're gonna talk a lot about old comics. We'll talk about new stuff as well. But one of the things we're gonna explore is the event. We're gonna talk a lot about comics from around that era, that sort of 80s, either pre-event, event, or post-event comics. But we will go more broadly than that. But I also today just kind of posted about this comic on the social medias. It's called Roach Mill. I don't know if you ever read Roach Mill in the 80s and 90s,
I
but
don't
it's
know
a comic
Roachville.
about a exterminator or bounty hunter or whatever kind of guy for hire that needs to do dirty jobs. And it ran for just a few issues. There was two series. One was published by Blackthorn Publishing, which was a short-lived company in the 80s, and then the series got picked up by Dark Horse later. It was one of the early sort of Dark Horse comics, and it's black and white, really just kind of beautifully done black and white. Tonally, it's all over the place. Can go from like kind of like hard sci-fi, really moody, beautifully drawn, darkly lit corridors and monsters and goofy aliens and things like that, and then all the way to like weird parody and stuff like that. So tonally it's really weird. Maybe that's why it was so um so I think it was popular but not popular enough to kind of to survive. But yeah, it's a really great comic. People should check it out. It's really great.
By
um
Rich Hedden and Tom McWeeny.
Yeah, I think they both ended up in animation. If you actually read the comic, you can kind of tell they're really into like action to action stuff. There's a lot of kind of almost animation keyframes kind of stuff going on in there. And then the other comic, I'll mention two. I'll mention two. The other comic that I really love is American Flag, and most people, at least in the know
I
Howard
love
Chaykin.
American Flag.
But most people think of American Flag as the first series. Usually think of the first 26 issues, which are drawn by Howard Chaykin. But I'm talking about American Flag, the second series, 1 through 12, that sort of ended, and Howard Chaykin came back, but only as a writer. Mike Vosburg was the principal artist there, although a lot of collaborators on that book. But I loved that book. It's almost like a little bit more funny kind of version. But what I loved about it is that there was a lot of kind of Sovietisms in there
Okay.
because they spend a lot of times in Russia.
Doesn't the
Russia.
first volume isn't the first issue of that volume actually American with a K
Yeah,
flag,
yeah, it's
at least
spelled
on the
like using
cover? Right.
Cyrillic
Right.
letters instead of
Right.
American letters. But I love that series. I think it's really good.
I'll tell Howard the next time I talk to him that you love his work, but better when he just writes it.
No, no, no. I love them equally. I just think that the series is underrated. I'll
I
put Howard
agree.
on top
It's
always.
fantastic.
But that series, those 12
I,
issues are totally
I was
underrated.
just I was just messing with you and doing the minor flex that Howard Chaykin has been on this podcast twice.
Oh, that's great.
I'm
That's great.
I'm kind of proud of the fact that he both came on and didn't hate me so much that he didn't come back.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I do
So,
think Howard, Chaykin is that's it's definitely a creator that I followed since the
oh,
80s.
he's
I've
fascinating.
got his stuff all the way through to today.
Yeah, yeah.
I think,
I
um,
I I
yeah,
I tend to love his stuff, but I think in general, whether you love or hate his stuff, you can't read his stuff and not think about his stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why I like it because it's
Right.
like it's kind of pulpy and propulsive, but it's also there's always that kind of element of kind of a some kind of like intellectual something going on,
Right.
which I appreciate. He's like you never feel like you're being talked down to. It's kind of
Oh God, no. Oh God, no. And you got to love anybody who loves Stephen Sondheim. At least that's one of my mottos.
I
So,
can see that, I guess. I don't know.
he does.
Yeah. Okay.
He's a big musical guy, period.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I'm
but
not.
yeah.
I'm not a big musical guy, but
Yeah. No, he actually will make the argument that musicals and comic books are the two great American art forms.
I mean, I don't disagree. I just not
Yeah.
that much into the musical,
No,
but
I get it. I get it.
uh, you know that
Um,
that's just me. I'm also not a man,
eh,
so
yeah, 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 yeah. No, you're not required to be into all cool things. I'm not into all cool things. I'm certain that you're into cool things that I go, really?
for sure.
Heck, it's football season in Chicago. I get to go, yeah, I don't care on a regular basis.
Hmm.
So Tom, it has been a blast. I always enjoy talking to you, whether it's in person or here. Hopefully you'll be back. Hopefully we'll see each other many more times in people.
Yeah, let's do a beta testing the apocalypse next.
Yeah, we should do that. I was going to say, everybody should read Beta Testing the Apocalypse. Um, everybody should read Cartoon Dialectics, and there aren't many imprints that I say are so curated that like you won't go wrong by reading them. But if you like one Uncivilized book, you're gonna like them all, um, because your powers of curation are fantastic. I suppose there are some people that just won't get any of them, but if you like one Uncivilized book, you're gonna like them all, even though you like them all for completely different reasons. Um,
Well, I hope
and
that's the
and I
case.
really appreciate that.
It's something I
Uh,
strive for.
yeah, no, I mean, people think that I give away praise easily, but I really don't. Um, I just like A, like a lot of things, and B, go out of my way to talk to the people who make the things that I like. So for Tom Kaczynski, this has been 22 panels, and we will see you after the next page.